Through the shimmering heat of the Arizona desert, the town of Rattler's End stood like a forgotten postcard from another time. Its weathered buildings and dust-swept streets held dark secrets behind closed shutters. As the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty main street, the only movement came from wanted posters fluttering in the hot breeze, all bearing the same face: Vicente El Cuervo Ramirez, the notorious leader of the Night Ravens gang. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Inside the town's only saloon, the usual afternoon quiet was shattered by the sound of breaking glass and cruel laughter. A group of rough-looking men wearing red bandanas, Ramirez's scouts, were teaching a lesson to old Frank Whitaker, the saloon's piano player, for daring to ask them to pay their tab. None of them noticed the stranger who had just tied his dappled gray horse outside, a lean man in a worn brown duster who moved with the quiet grace of a mountain lion. As the stranger pushed through the saloon's swinging doors, the only sound was the soft jingle of his spurs. His face, partially hidden by a wide-brimmed black hat, showed no expression as he surveyed the scene. To the thugs, he looked like just another tired traveler seeking shelter from the merciless desert sun. They had no way of knowing they were in the presence of Marshal Michael Hawk, known to a select few as the Shadow of the Territories, a man whose true identity was known to few, but whose deeds had become whispered legends throughout the West. Rattler's End wasn't always a place where decent folks barred their doors at sunset. Just 3 years ago, it had been a promising silver mining town, drawing honest workers and their families from across the territory. But that was before Vicente El Cuervo Ramirez and his Night Ravens decided to make it their stronghold. The saloon fell silent as Marshal Michael Hawk stepped inside, save for old Frank's labored breathing as he tried to pull himself up from the floor. Broken glass crunched under Hawk's boots as he made his way to the bar, seemingly oblivious to the 5 ravens watching him with growing interest. Behind the bar, a weathered man with a graying mustache, Samuel Reed, the owner, nervously polished a glass that was already clean. "Water," Hawk said quietly, placing a coin on the counter. His voice was soft but carried an undertone that made Reed's hands tremble slightly as he filled a glass. The afternoon heat had left a fine layer of dust on Hawk's duster, and his calm demeanor seemed almost out of place in a town so clearly gripped by fear. The largest of the ravens, a brute with a nasty scar running down his left cheek, nudged his companions and grinned. "Hey, stranger," he called out, his words slurring slightly from the whiskey they'd been drinking all afternoon. "You must be new here. Don't you know this is a private establishment?" Hawk took a slow sip of his water, neither turning nor responding. Through the grimy saloon window, he could see women hurriedly ushering their children indoors. A man carrying supplies from the general store quickened his pace, eyes downcast. The town's fear was palpable, written in every furtive glance and hurried step. "I'm talking to you, stranger," the scared man growled, pushing away from his table. His spurs made an uneven rhythm as he approached the bar, his hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. Behind him, his companions spread out, anticipating entertainment. Reed's face went pale. "Mr. Cruz, please," he started. "He's just passing through." "Shut it, old man," Cruz snapped, now standing just a few feet from Hawk. "I'm teaching our guests about local customs." He reached for Hawk's glass, intending to spill it. What happened next was so fast that later, when the witnesses tried to describe it, they couldn't agree on the sequence of events. Somehow, Hawk's left hand caught Cruz's wrist before it reached the glass, while his right hand remained casually resting on the bar. Cruz's face contorted in surprise and pain as Hawk applied pressure to a specific point on his wrist, forcing him to his knees without apparent effort. "The water here," Hawk said in the same quiet voice, "is quite good. It would be a shame to waste it." He released Cruz, who scrambled backward, nursing his wrist, his face red with humiliation and rage. "You're dead," Cruz snarled, reaching for his gun. But before his fingers could close around the grip, Hawk's duster had shifted ever so slightly, revealing his own holster. He hadn't drawn, hadn't even touched his weapon, but something in his stance, in the way his eyes caught the light, made Cruz freeze. For the first time since entering the saloon, Hawk turned to fully face the ravens. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, took in each man in turn. "I imagine," he said, "that Mr. Whitaker could use some help getting to the doctor. Why don't you gentlemen make yourselves useful?" The ravens looked at each other, uncertainty. Cruz's hand still hovered near his gun, but there was sweat on his brow now that hadn't been there before. Something about the stranger's calm confidence had shaken him. "This ain't over," Cruz finally spat, backing toward the door. He gestured to his men, who helped him carry Frank Whitaker out of the saloon, their earlier bravado notably diminished. As the doors swung shut behind them, Reed let out a long breath. "You shouldn't have done that, mister," he said, though there was a hint of admiration in his voice. "They'll be back and they'll bring more men." Cruz is El Cuervo's right hand. Hawk finished his water and placed the glass gently on the counter. "Tell me about Ramirez," he said, ignoring the warning. "Tell me how he took control of Rattler's End." Reed glanced nervously at the windows, then leaned closer. "It started with protection money," he whispered. "Then they took control of the silver shipments. Anyone who refused to pay or tried to stand up to them." He trailed off, his eyes drifting to a collection of photographs on the wall, faces of people who were no longer around to have their pictures taken. As Reed spoke, Hawk noticed a young woman watching from the shadow of the staircase, her face a mixture of fear and something else. Hope, perhaps. She quickly disappeared upstairs when she saw him looking, but not before he glimpsed the bruises on her wrist. The sun was beginning to set outside, painting the sky in shades of blood red. Soon, Cruz would return with reinforcements, expecting to find an easy target. Instead, they would find the beginning of their end, though they didn't know it yet. As darkness crept over Rattler's End, Reed found himself studying the peculiar stranger who had chosen to remain at the bar despite his warning. There was something different about the way Hawk carried himself, a kind of coiled readiness beneath his calm exterior that reminded Reed of a rattlesnake before it strikes. "They say El Cuervo keeps his main force camped in the old silver mine," Reed continued, keeping his voice low. 30 men, maybe more. They ride out to raid supply wagons and terrorize nearby settlements. The town marshal. He gestured to another photograph on the wall, this one of a young man in a badge. "Let's just say we haven't had law here for 8 months. Hawk's eyes lingered on the marshal's photograph. "Thomas Green," he said softly, surprising Reed. "I knew him. Good man, fast draw." Before Reed could ask how Hawk knew the dead marshal's name, the saloon doors burst open. Cruz had returned as expected, but he wasn't alone. 8 more ravens filed in behind him, their red bandanas stark against the gathering darkness. Among them was a tall, lean Mexican with a silver-handled revolver, Diego Cortez, El Cuervo's younger brother. "This is the one?" Cortez asked, his accent thick but his English precise. Cruz nodded, still nursing his wrist. Cortez approached the bar, his movements casual but calculated. Unlike the others, he carried himself with an educated air, making him somehow more menacing. "Señor, I must apologize for my men's earlier behavior. They can be overzealous." Hawk turned slowly on his bar stool, one arm resting casually on the bar. "No apology needed," he said. "I'm sure they'll be more courteous in the future." A tight smile played across Cortez's face. "Ah, but you see, there is a problem. In Rattler's End, respect is everything. My brother, El Cuervo, built this town with respect, and you, señor." He gestured to Cruz's wrist. "You have shown disrespect." "Your brother didn't build anything," Hawk replied, his voice carrying clearly through the tense silence. "He took what others built. There's a difference." The ravens shifted uneasily, hands moving to their weapons, but Cortez held up a hand, still smiling. "You are either very brave or very foolish strangers, perhaps both. May I know your name?" "Smith," Hawk said. "John Smith." Cortez laughed, a sound without humor. "Of course, and I am the King of Spain." He studied Hawk more carefully now. "You know, There are stories circulating in the territory. Stories of a man who brings trouble to established operations like ours. They say he moves like a ghost, never staying in one place long enough to cast a shadow. They call him the Shadow of the Territories. Cortez's hand moved casually to rest on his silver-handled revolver. But surely you are not him. He would not be so foolish as to walk into our town alone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. From her hiding place on the stairs, the young woman from earlier, Sarah Reed, the owner's daughter, watched the scene unfold with growing tension. She had seen many men try to stand up to the Ravens before. None had lived to try twice. "I'm just passing through," Hawk said, turning back to the bar. "Looking for work." "Ah, then perhaps we can help each other," Cortez replied. "We are always looking for men with special talents. That move you used on Cruz, where did you learn such a thing?" "Here and there," Hawk said vaguely. "Picked up a few tricks during the war?" Cortez's eyes narrowed. Which side? Whichever was paying better at the time. This drew a genuine laugh from Cortez. "A man after my own heart. Perhaps you would join us for dinner? El Cuervo himself is returning tomorrow. He would be very interested in meeting someone of your capabilities." Hawk appeared to consider the offer. "Appreciate the invitation," he said finally. "But I prefer to earn my meals honestly." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Cortez's smile vanished. "I had hoped we could be reasonable," he said, "but you leave me no choice. You have until sunrise to leave Rattler's End. After that." He left the threat hanging in the air. As Cortez and his men filed out of the saloon, Reed let out a shaky breath. "You should take their offer to leave," he said. "Last man who stood up to them like that ended up face down in Bitter Creek." Hawk stood, adjusting his duster. "They mentioned the old silver mine," he said, ignoring Reed's warning once again. "How far?" "About 3 miles north, but—" Reed shook his head. "You can't be thinking of going there, that's suicide." "I need to see their operation," Hawk said simply. "And Mr. Reed, you might want to keep your daughter away from the saloon tomorrow. Things could get messy." Reed's eyes widened. He hadn't mentioned having a daughter, nor had Sarah spoken to the stranger. Yet somehow, Hawk had noticed her presence and understood the situation perfectly. As Hawk stepped out into the night, Sarah emerged from her hiding place. "Father," she whispered, "do you think he's really—" Reed stared at the saloon doors as they swung shut. "I don't know, child, but whoever he is, I fear tomorrow will be a day Rattler's End won't soon forget." The pre-dawn light found Hawk perched on a ridge overlooking the old silver mine, his dappled gray horse tethered quietly behind him. Through his brass spyglass, he could see the night raven's camp sprawled across the mine's entrance, tents scattered like dark mushrooms, cookfires sending thin streams of smoke into the purple sky. But what caught his attention was the steady stream of workers being led into the mine shaft. They weren't miners, at least not willing ones. Even from this distance, he could see the chains that bound them together. Most wore the remnants of civilian clothes, and their shuffling gait spoke of exhaustion and defeat. Among them, he spotted several faces that matched the missing persons posters he'd seen in towns across the territory. A movement near the mine entrance drew his attention. A figure emerged, his black clothes and raven-feathered hat marking him as someone of importance. Even without the distinctive scar running from his left eye to his jaw, Hawk would have recognized Vicente El Cuervo Ramirez from the wanted posters. The notorious gang leader was supervising the morning shift change, occasionally barking orders at his men in rapid-fire Spanish. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" a quiet voice said behind him. Hawk didn't turn around. "Morning, Sheriff Green," he said softly. Or should I say former Sheriff Green. Thomas Green, the supposedly dead marshal from the photograph in Reed's saloon, settled down beside Hawk in the dust. He looked considerably worse for wear, his face gaunt, his once proud mustache unkempt. "They told everyone I was dead," he said. "Truth is, I'm something worse. I'm their bookkeeper now. keeping track of their stolen silver, their forced labor, their protection rackets. His voice was heavy with shame. They've got my wife and daughter in there, you see, in the company housing behind the mine. Hawk lowered his spyglass. I know. That's why I'm here. Green's eyes widened. The territory sent you? After all this time? Not exactly, Hawk replied. Let's just say I have a personal interest in dismantling operations like this. He paused, studying the camp's layout. Tell me about their routine. Green spoke quickly, his words carrying the weight of long observation. El Cuervo runs everything like a military operation. Guards change every 6 hours. They keep the stolen silver in the old assay office, that building with the green door. The forced laborers work 12-hour shifts mining new silver. They've got about 40 armed men split between here and town. And the families? The hostages? Kept in the old mining company houses behind the main shaft, always guarded. They use them to keep the workers in line. Green's voice cracked. My Sarah. She's only 12. Hawk's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gray eyes. I saw Cortez in town last night. He's running things while El Cuervo's been away. Yes, Diego handles the day-to-day operations in town. He's the smart one, educated in Mexico City. But El Cuervo, he's something else. I've seen him gun down 3 men before they could clear leather. And he enjoys it. Down in the camp, El Cuervo was berating one of his men, his voice carrying faintly on the morning breeze. The man had apparently failed to properly secure a group of workers, and El Cuervo's solution was swift and brutal. A single gunshot echoed across the valley, followed by absolute silence. That's his way, Green whispered. Rule through fear. Even his own men are terrified of him. The only one he trusts is his brother. Hawk carefully packed away his spyglass. How often do they move the silver? Every 2 weeks. There's a shipment going out tomorrow night. They disguise it as regular mining operation supplies. Hide the silver in crates marked as equipment parts. The territorial deputies don't even look twice at it. And the workers' families? The hostages? Kept separately, the men work the mines while their families are held in the company houses. Any trouble from the workers, their families suffer. Any trouble from the families. Green trailed off, his hands shaking slightly. Hawk stood, brushing dust from his duster. You should get back before they notice you're missing. But first, tell me about the mine itself. Are there other ways besides the main shaft? Green nodded. There's an old ventilation shaft about half a mile east. Comes out behind the assay office. They don't guard it because it's supposed to collapse. But I've seen some of the children use it to sneak extra food to their fathers. Good, Hawk said. One more thing. The woman at the saloon, Sarah Reed. What's her connection to all this? Green's face darkened. El Cuervo's taken a shine to her. Says he's going to make her his wife, whether she wants to or not. That's why she stays close to the saloon. Her father thinks he can protect her, but... He shook his head. You saw how well that works. Hawk mounted his horse with fluid grace. Get back to camp. Tomorrow night, when you hear the commotion start, get as many families as you can to the ventilation shaft entrance. I'll have someone waiting there. You're really going to take them on? All of them? Green asked incredulously. Even if you are who they say you are, this is suicide. A ghost of a smile crossed Hawk's face. Maybe, but sometimes the only way to deal with rabid wolves is to walk right into their den. He turned his horse toward town. Besides, I made a promise to your wife before she sent that letter asking for help. And I always keep my promises. As Hawk rode away, Green watched him with a mixture of hope and fear. Down in the camp, El Cuervo was inspecting his men's weapons, unaware that the quiet stranger he'd heard about from his brother was about to turn his whole operation upside down. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Rattler's End as Hawk rode back into town. The streets were busier, now, with townsfolk going about their business under the watchful eyes of the night ravens. He noticed how people walked quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact. The unmistakable behavior of a population living under tyranny, As he passed the general store, he caught sight of Cruz and two other ravens harassing the shopkeeper, an elderly Chinese man named Wei Chen. They were knocking goods off his shelves, demanding higher protection payments. Chen's young son watched helplessly from behind the counter, his small fists clenched in silent rage. Hawk dismounted smoothly, tying his horse to the hitching post. The soft jingle of his spurs announced his entrance into the store. Cruz turned, his face darkening with recognition and hatred. "You're still here," Cruz snarled, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. "I thought my boss told you to be gone by sunrise." "Needed supplies," Hawk said calmly, picking up a can of beans that the ravens had knocked to the floor. He placed it carefully back on the shelf. "Mr. Chen, I'll need some ammunition. 45 caliber. 4 boxes." The ravens exchanged glances, then burst out laughing. "4 boxes?" Cruz sneered. "Planning a war, friend?" "Something like that," Hawk replied, his gray eyes meeting Cruz's. The laughter died in the thug's throat. Before Cruz could respond, the store's door opened again. Diego Cortez stepped in, his silver-handled revolver glinting in the sunlight streaming through the windows. "Senor Smith," he said, his cultured voice carrying a note of amusement. "I see you've chosen to ignore our friendly warning." "Just getting supplies," Hawk repeated, still focused on helping Chen clean up his shelves. "Then I'll be on my way." Cortez studied him with calculated interest. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Something about you seemed familiar." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "So I had one of my men ride to Silver Springs. They had some interesting posters there." Hawk straightened slowly, turning to face Cortez. The store had grown deathly quiet. "The description matches," Cortez continued. "A tall man, gray eyes, moves like a cat. They call him the Shadow of the Territories, known for dismantling operations like ours in 3 other territories." His smile turned predatory. "There's quite a price on your head." "Could be anyone," Hawk said quietly. "Gray eyes aren't that uncommon." "True," Cortez agreed. "But what interests me most is the timing. You arrived just as we're preparing to move our largest silver shipment yet. Coincidence?" The tension in the store was palpable. Cruz and his men had spread out, hands hovering near their weapons. Young Chen had ducked behind the counter, while his father stood frozen, clutching a broom like a shield. "I find," Hawk said carefully, "that coincidences make life interesting." Cortez laughed. "Indeed they do. You know, my brother returns today. He's very interested in meeting you, especially after I told him about your little display of skill last night." He gestured to Cruz's still-bandaged wrist. "Perhaps you'll join us for dinner after all." "Appreciate the offer," Hawk replied, "but I have other plans." "I insist," Cortez said, his voice hardening. "Cruz, help our friend understand the importance of accepting my brother's hospitality." Cruz grinned, drawing his gun. But before he could level it, Hawk's hand shot out, grabbing a can of peaches from the shelf and hurling it with deadly accuracy. The can struck Cruz's gun hand, sending his weapon clattering to the floor. In the same fluid motion, Hawk had already drawn his own revolver, the barrel aimed steadily at Cortez's chest. The other ravens had their guns out now, but Cortez held up a hand, stopping them. His smile had grown wider. "Impressive," he said. "Very impressive. But surely you don't think you can take all of us, you know?" "No need to," Hawk replied calmly. "Just you. Question is, are you as fast with that fancy silver gun as your brother is with his?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Cortez laughed again, but this time there was an edge of uncertainty in it. "You know what? Keep your ammunition, Senor Smith. Consider it a gift." He backed toward the door, keeping his hands visible. "But do join us for dinner tonight. El Cuervo will be most disappointed if you don't." After they left, Chen sagged against his counter, trembling. "You shouldn't have done that," he said in accented English. "They will kill you now." How much do I owe you for the ammunition? Hawk asked, ignoring the warning. No charge, Chen replied quickly. Just, please, when they come for you, stay away from my store. Hawk placed several silver dollars on the counter anyway. Your son, he said quietly. He's got spirit, but keep him inside tonight. Things might get messy. As he stepped back into the street, Hawk could feel eyes on him from every window. The word would spread quickly now. The shadow of the territories was in Rattler's End. El Cuervo would know soon if he didn't already. Up the street, he saw Sarah Reed watching from the saloon window. She quickly ducked away when she saw him looking, but not before he caught the gleam of hope in her eyes. The same hope he'd seen in countless other towns before things got bloody. Night was coming to Rattler's End, and with it, the real work would begin. The sun was setting behind the mountains when Reed's saloon began filling with night ravens, more than anyone in town had seen gathered in one place before. El Cuervo's return had brought the entire gang together, their raucous laughter and drunken shouting spilling out into the darkening streets. Through the grimy windows, townsfolk hurrying home could see the gang leader himself, holding court at the largest table, his raven-feathered hat casting sinister shadows in the lamplight. In the stable behind the general store, Hawk was having a very different kind of meeting. And what about you? Green asked from his position by the door. You can't take on the entire gang alone. A ghost of a smile crossed Hawk's face. I won't be alone. I'll have the one thing every gang like this fears most. Chaos. He turned to Martinez. That's where you come in. How much black powder do you still have hidden in your shop? The blacksmith's eyes widened with understanding. 3 or 4 kegs. Was saving it for, well, for something like this, I suppose. Perfect. Hawk drew more lines in the dirt. Here's what's going to happen. In about an hour, I'm going to accept El Cuervo's dinner invitation. While all eyes are on me, Martinez will position the powder kegs here, here, and here. He marked 3 spots on his map. Cooper, you'll need to quietly spread the word. When people hear the first explosion, they move to the smithy. Not before. What about Sarah Reed? Doc Harris asked quietly. El Cuervo's got plans for her tonight, that's why they're all celebrating. Hawk's expression hardened momentarily. Sarah won't be in the saloon when things start. Green, you'll make sure of that. Tell Reed to send her to Doc's place with some excuse. Seeking medicine for a headache, anything. Doc, keep her there until you hear the signal. Thomas Green stood nervously by the door, keeping watch, while Hawk spoke in hushed tones with 3 men who had slipped in through the back. James Cooper, the former mine foreman, Daniel Martinez, once the town's blacksmith, and William Doc Harris, the town physician. The ventilation shaft is our key, Hawk explained, sketching a rough map on the dirt floor. Green tells me it comes out behind the assay office. That's where they're keeping the silver and most of their ammunition. But they'll be expecting something, Cooper interjected. After what happened at the store today. They're expecting a frontal assault, Hawk cut in. A gunfight in the streets. That's why they've gathered so many men at the saloon. He pointed to different spots on his crude map. What they don't know is that while they're watching me, you 3 will be positioning the townspeople. Doc Harris frowned. The townspeople? But they're terrified. They won't fight. They don't need to fight, Hawk said. They just need to be ready to move. Martinez, how many people can you hide in your old smithy? The blacksmith thought for a moment. 20, maybe 30 if they crowd in. Good. When things start, that's where the women and children go first. Cooper, you'll guide them through the back alleys to the ventilation shaft. Doc, you'll need your wagon ready, packed with medical supplies and waiting at the crossing of Bitter Creek. The men absorbed their instructions in tense silence, the weight of what they were about to attempt hanging heavy in the stable's musty air. Finally, Cooper spoke. Why are you doing this? Really? This isn't your fight? Hawk stood, brushing dirt from his duster. 3 months ago, I got a letter from Mrs. Green. She managed to smuggle it out with a sympathetic trader. She wrote about what was happening here, the forced labor, the hostages, the terror. But mostly she wrote about her daughter watching her father being broken day by day, about how the children in the camp cry themselves to sleep every night. He checked his revolvers with practiced efficiency. Sometimes a man has to decide what kind of world he's willing to live in. But why you? Martinez pressed. What made you become… what do they call you? For a long moment, Hawk was silent, his gray eyes distant. During the war, I was part of a unit that specialized in disrupting supply lines. We got very good at turning entire camps into chaos with just a few well-placed charges and some careful timing. After the war, he shrugged. Let's just say I found a use for those skills that lets me sleep at night. A commotion from the street interrupted them. More ravens arriving at the saloon, their horses kicking up dust in the twilight. Through the stable's slats, they could see Diego Cortez dismounting, his silver-handled revolver catching the last rays of sunlight. It's time, Hawk said. Remember, wait for the first explosion, then move fast. Once things start, they'll happen quickly. He turned to Green. Get back to the mine. Be ready to move the families when you hear it. And Thomas, tonight your daughter sees her father stand tall again. As the others slipped away into the gathering darkness, Hawk straightened his hat and checked his reflection in a horse's water trough. The man who looked back at him appeared calm, almost lazy, just another drifter who might have wandered into town looking for work. Only his eyes, hard as steel in the fading light, betrayed the truth of what was to come. From the saloon came the sound of rough laughter and breaking glass. El Cuervo and his ravens were celebrating what they thought would be another victory. They had no way of knowing that their party was about to turn into something very different indeed. Hawk stepped out of the stable and into the street, his spurs making their familiar soft melody against the packed earth. It was time to attend a dinner party. The saloon was packed with night ravens when Hawk pushed through the swinging doors. Well, I do. Carson City, Tombstone, Silver Springs. Each time a mysterious stranger arrives, each time chaos follows, and each time the stranger disappears like smoke. He raised his glass in a mock toast. Very impressive work. Diego Cortez appeared at his brother's shoulder, whispering something in Spanish. El Cuervo's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. It seems some of my men have spotted your old friend Thomas Green skulking around the mine camp. Interesting, no? Everyone thought he was dead. Hawk took another small sip of whiskey. Outside, the sun had fully set, and the first stars were appearing. Almost time. Lots of dead men walking around these days. Indeed. El Cuervo stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. Let's stop dancing around this, senor. You're here about the mine, about the workers, maybe even about the silver. But what you don't understand is that this is not like your other little adventures. This is my town. These are my people. Funny, Hawk replied, still seated. Don't recall seeing your name on the deed. The room had gone deathly quiet. Every raven was watching now, hands on weapons. Through the window, Hawk could see more movement. Townspeople quietly making their way toward Martinez's smithy, keeping to the shadows. You know what I think? El Cuervo said, his voice dangerously soft. I think you're not as clever as you believe. I think you've walked right into a trap. You see, I knew someone would come eventually. The territory marshals, maybe. Or someone like you. So I prepared. He snapped his fingers, and more ravens appeared from the kitchen and upstairs. Count them, senor, 40 men, all loyal, all killers. Hawk finally stood, adjusting his duster casually. Impressive numbers, he said. Must be expensive, feeding all these men. They earn their keep, El Cuervo snarled. Just as you could have, but instead… He drew his gun with lightning speed, pressing it against Hawk's chest. Instead, you chose to die in a worthless attempt to play hero. The clock on the wall struck 9. Right on time. Funny thing about heroes, Hawk said quietly. They tend to be a distraction. The first explosion rocked the saloon, sending glasses and bottles crashing to the floor. Before anyone could react, 2 more blasts followed in quick succession. El Cuervo staggered, his gun dropping slightly, all Hawk needed. In one fluid motion, he knocked the gang leader's weapon aside and drove his fist into the man's throat. Chaos erupted as ravens scrambled to respond to multiple threats. Through the windows, they could see buildings burning and hear screaming in the streets. Cortez was shouting orders, trying to organize his men, but no one knew which direction the attack was coming from. In the confusion, Hawk slipped away from El Cuervo, who was gasping for breath on the floor. Just before he reached the door, he turned back. "Oh, and one more thing," he called out. "You might want to check on your hostages at the mine. They're probably long gone by now." El Cuervo's eyes widened with understanding and rage just as the fourth explosion lit up the night sky. The real battle for Rattler's End was about to begin. The night erupted into chaos as planned, but even the best plans rarely survive first contact with reality. As Hawk ducked out of the saloon, a bullet splintered the door frame inches from his head. El Cuervo's rage-filled roar could be heard over the pandemonium, followed by rapid-fire Spanish orders to his men. The street had transformed into a scene from hell. Martinez's powder kegs had done their work well, perhaps too well. The assay office was fully ablaze, and the fire was spreading faster than anticipated. Through the smoke and confusion, Hawk could see townspeople running toward the smithy, while ravens scattered in all directions, trying to respond to what they thought was a coordinated attack from multiple directions. But something was wrong. The crowd moving toward the smithy was too small. "Cooper!" Hawk grabbed the former foreman as he ran past. "Where are the others?" Cooper's face was streaked with soot. "El Cuervo had more men at the mine than we thought. They're holding some families back, using them as shields. Green's trapped up there with them." Before Hawk could respond, Sarah Reed's scream cut through the chaos. He spun to see Diego Cortez dragging her from Doc Harris's office, his silver-handled revolver pressed to her temple. The doctor lay unconscious, or worse, in the doorway. "Shadow!" El Cuervo's voice boomed from the saloon entrance. The gang leader's face was a mask of fury, blood trickling from where Hawk's punch had split his lip. "You want to play games? Let's play." He fired 2 shots into the air. "Everyone listen. My men at the mine have orders. For every minute I don't get a signal, they kill 1 hostage. Starting with the green girl." Hawk took cover behind a water trough as bullets peppered the street around him. The situation was unraveling fast. The plan had counted on surprise and confusion, but El Cuervo was proving more ruthless and adaptable than expected. 10 seconds, Shadow," El Cuervo shouted. "Show yourself or the Reed girl dies first, then we start on the mine families." Through the smoke, Hawk caught a glimpse of Samuel Reed rushing from the burning saloon, his face contorted in anguish as he watched his daughter struggle in Cortez's grip. The old man reached for a fallen raven's gun. "Mr. Reed, don't," Hawk called out, but it was too late. Cortez spotted the movement and fired without hesitation. Reed collapsed, Sarah's scream of, "Papa!" drowning out even the crackling flames. The moment crystallized for Hawk, bringing with it memories he'd tried to bury. Another town, another night of flames, another father dying in front of his child. He'd been too young to help then, too scared to act, but not tonight. "Last chance, Shadow," El Cuervo called out. "Or should I tell my men at the mine to start with Thomas Green's wife? Make him watch before we kill him too?" Hawk closed his eyes for a moment, remembering Mrs. Green's letter, remembering the hope in Sarah's eyes, remembering all the times he'd seen that same hope die in other towns when good people waited too long to act. "All right," he called out, slowly standing from behind the water trough. "Let's talk." El Cuervo grinned triumphantly. "Drop your guns. All of them." Hawk complied, his revolvers making dull thuds in the dirt. Around them, the fire continued to spread, casting everything in a hellish glow. "Now walk to me," El Cuervo commanded, slowly. As Hawk stepped into the open street, he caught movement in his peripheral vision. Young Chen, the shopkeeper's son, was crawling through the shadows with his father's old rifle. Behind El Cuervo, Martinez was positioning himself with the last powder keg. And up on the roof of the burning saloon, he glimpsed Cooper with a coil of rope. They were all waiting for his signal. Ordinary townspeople ready to risk everything for a chance at freedom. The same choice he'd faced as a boy, watching his own town burn. But this time would be different. "You know what your mistake was, Tut?" El Cuervo asked, as Hawk approached, his gun trained on Hawk's chest. "You thought fear was enough. You thought a few explosions would break my men's loyalty. But fear?" He laughed. "Fear is my currency, Shadow. And tonight everyone learns what happens when they defy—" The gang leader's monologue was cut short by a sound that made everyone freeze. The distant but clear ring of a silver bell, the mine's emergency signal. El Cuervo's triumphant expression faltered. That wasn't his men's signal, which meant— "No," Hawk said quietly, allowing himself a small smile. "My mistake was letting you think this was all about me." The night erupted into new chaos as the real phase of the plan began, not from the mysterious stranger but from the people of Rattler's End themselves, who had finally decided what kind of world they were willing to live in. The time for tactics and careful planning was over. Now it was just going to be blood and justice in the desert night. The silver bell's echo had barely faded when multiple things happened at once. Young Chen's shot from the shadows went wide, alerting the Ravens to his position. Martinez's dash with the powder keg was spotted, forcing him to take cover behind a burning wagon. And Cooper's attempt to create a diversion from the roof was cut short when part of the burning saloon collapsed beneath him. El Cuervo recovered from his surprise with frightening speed. "Kill them all!" he roared, firing at Hawk, who dove and rolled behind a rain barrel. The barrel exploded in a spray of water and splinters as more bullets found their mark. Sarah Reed seized her chance in the confusion, driving her elbow into Diego Cortez's ribs. But instead of releasing her, he knocked her unconscious with the butt of his silver-handled revolver. "Brother," he shouted to El Cuervo, "we need to get to the mine." Through the smoke and chaos, Hawk saw his carefully laid plan disintegrating. The townspeople's courage was there, but their timing was off, their coordination scattered. They were citizens, not soldiers, and it showed. A bullet grazed his shoulder as he made a dash for his dropped revolvers. Two Ravens cut him off, forcing him to dive through the shattered window of the general store. He landed hard on broken glass, feeling it bite through his duster. "Got you now, Shadow," one of the Ravens sneered, stepping through the window after him. But he had followed too quickly, not checking his corners. Wei Chen emerged from behind a shelf with a meat cleaver, and suddenly, the Raven had more immediate concerns. Hawk used the distraction to scramble deeper into the store, looking for another way out. Through the back window, he could see El Cuervo and Cortez mounting their horses, a still unconscious Sarah slung across Cortez's saddle. "They're heading for the mine!" Cooper shouted from somewhere in the street. "They'll kill all the hostages." Hawk finally reached his fallen revolvers, snatching them from the dirt, just as three more Ravens burst through the store's front door. He dropped two, but the third got off a lucky shot that caught him in the left arm, spinning him against a shelf of canned goods. The pain was immediate and intense, but he'd had worse. What worried him more was the sound of galloping hooves growing fainter, El Cuervo and Cortez making their escape with Sarah, heading toward the mine where Green's rescue attempt was clearly not going as planned. "Martinez!" he shouted, ducking behind a counter as more bullets splintered the woodwork around him. "The last powder keg. Get it to the livery stable." But Martinez was pinned down, and the remaining Ravens were reorganizing, their initial confusion giving way to practiced violence. These weren't common bandits. They were hardened killers who had faced chaos before. Through a gap in the shelving, Hawk could see the street filling with more of El Cuervo's men, drawn by the sounds of fighting. The explosion that was supposed to block their return route from their camp hadn't happened. Something had gone wrong with that part of the plan. "Shadow!" It was Doc Harris, crouched in the alley behind the store. Green's wife got a message through. The mine rescue failed. El Cuervo had more men hidden in the deeper tunnels. They've got both groups of hostages now. Hawk. Ngornomi fur. Dibras tibraid. both from the news and from the pain in his arm. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. His careful strategy of divided forces and multiple diversions had backfired. Instead of splitting the Ravens' response, it had split the townspeople's effectiveness. A massive explosion rocked the night, but not from the powder kegs. The Ravens had found Martinez's ammunition store and decided to use his own tactics against them. The blast sent townspeople scrambling for cover, their newfound courage wavering in the face of professional killers who were now controlling the chaos rather than reacting to it. "Fall back," Hawk shouted to the townspeople. "Get to the church." It wasn't part of the plan, but plans were worthless now. They needed to regroup, to think of something new before El Cuervo reached the mine and turned this setback into a massacre. But never like this, never with so many lives in the balance. As the townspeople retreated to the church under covering fire from the few who still had ammunition, Hawk felt the weight of his failure pressing down harder than the pain. He'd underestimated El Cuervo, overestimated the element of surprise, and now Sarah Reed, the Green family, and all the other hostages would pay the price. Unless... Through the haze of pain and gun smoke, a new plan began to form. Not a clever one with multiple phases and careful timing. Not a strategic masterpiece of misdirection and chaos. Something much simpler, much more dangerous, and probably suicidal. But first, he had to survive the next few minutes as the Ravens closed in on the store, their boots crunching on broken glass as they moved to surround him. The night wasn't over yet, but it was about to get much, much worse. The church basement was dim, lit only by a few scattered lanterns. Doc Harris worked on Hawk's arm by their flickering light, digging for the bullet while Cooper and Martinez kept watch upstairs. The sounds of Ravens searching the town filtered through the floorboards. "Hold still," Doc muttered, probing deeper with his forceps. "Bullets caught on the bone." Hawk didn't flinch, his gray eyes focused on something distant. The fever was rising, but his mind remained clear, focused on the new plan forming in his thoughts. They had maybe an hour before El Cuervo would start killing hostages at the mine. "Got it," Doc said, finally extracting the bullet with a wet sound. As he began stitching the wound, he glanced at Hawk's face. "You've been shot before. Many times." It wasn't a question. The old scars were visible even in the poor light, a map of past battles etched in flesh. "Occupational hazard," Hawk replied quietly. "These wounds," Doc continued, his experienced fingers working quickly, "they tell a story. This one here, cavalry saber. This burn pattern, cannon fire, close range. You weren't just any soldier during the war. You were something else." Hawk remained silent as the doctor finished his work. Above them, they could hear Martinez giving instructions to the remaining townspeople who had made it to the church. Maybe 20 in all out of a town of hundreds. "I need paper," Hawk said suddenly, "and ink, and someone who knows the mine's layout perfectly." Cooper came down the stairs, his face grim. "Ravens have pulled back to the mine. They're positioning men all along the ridge. No way to get close without being seen." "We're not going to get close," Hawk replied, accepting a pen and paper from Doc. "We're going to walk right in the front." The others stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. The fever was definitely getting worse, but the plan was crystallizing with burning clarity. "Cooper," he said, starting to sketch, "tell me about the deeper tunnels, the ones they had men hidden in." The former foreman leaned over the rough map taking shape on the paper. "There's a whole network down there from the early days. Most were abandoned when the silver veins ran dry, but they connect to the main shaft here, here, and here." He pointed to different spots. "That's how they surprised us during the rescue attempt. And the ventilation shaft? Comes out behind the assay office like we planned, but they'll be watching it now." Hawk nodded, adding more details to his drawing. "The dynamite storage. Where is it?" Cooper's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. One stray shot down there would bring the whole mountain down." "Exactly." The basement fell silent except for the scratch of Hawk's pen and the distant sound of ravens calling to each other in the darkness outside. Finally, Martinez spoke up from the stairs. Even if we could get to the dynamite, even if we could set it up without being caught, you're talking about collapsing part of the mine, with hostages inside. No, Hawk said, finishing his sketch. I'm talking about making El Cuervo think we're going to collapse the mine. He's smart, experienced. He'll have thought of everything, except the one thing no sane man would do. Understanding began to dawn on their faces as Hawk explained his plan. It was simple, brutal, and relied on El Cuervo's greatest strength becoming his weakness, his tactical intelligence. We'll need black powder, Hawk continued. Not for explosions this time, for something else. And I need every piece of mirror you can find in town, plus ram's horn or another hollow horn if anyone has one. Doc Harris shook his head in amazement. You're going to play on his expectations. Make him think you're doing one thing while actually doing something much simpler, Hawk finished. He stood, testing his injured arm. The stitches held, though fire shot through the wound. Cooper, pick 3 men who can move quietly and know the old tunnels. Martinez, I need you to gather specific supplies. He handed them each a list. What about the rest of us? Doc asked. Get ready to treat the wounded. There will be many before dawn. Hawk checked his revolvers, counting his remaining ammunition. Not enough. Never enough. And I need someone to help me with one more thing. Young Chen stepped out of the shadows where he'd been listening. In his hands, he held his father's old rifle. I can help, he said quietly. I know what needs to be done. Hawk studied the boy for a moment, seeing the same steel he'd seen in other young eyes long ago. It's dangerous. So is living like this, Chen replied simply. Outside, the night had grown quieter, the calm before the storm. Up at the mine, El Cuervo would be feeling confident, thinking he had won. Thinking like a tactical genius, considering every angle, preparing for every possibility. But some possibilities were too insane to prepare for. Sometimes the simplest plan was the one no one expected, precisely because it was suicidal. And sometimes, that made it the only plan that could work. Hawk looked at the determined faces around him. A doctor, a foreman, a blacksmith, a Chinese boy with an old rifle. Not soldiers, not killers, just people who had finally decided enough was enough. Let's get to work, he said. We've got a lot to do before dawn. The pre-dawn darkness shrouded the desert as Hawk walked alone toward the mine entrance, his hands raised in apparent surrender. Izrania dozens of ravens lined the ridge above, their rifles trained on his approaching figure. The wound in his arm throbbed with each step, but his eyes remained fixed on his target, El Cuervo, standing at the mine's entrance with Diego Cortez beside him. So, El Cuervo called out, his voice carrying easily in the still morning air. The great shadow finally breaks. Behind him, Sarah Reed lay unconscious, guarded by 2 ravens. Drop your guns and come forward. Hawk complied, his revolvers falling to the dust. As he approached, he could see the hostages, men, women, and children huddled together under guard near the mine shaft. Thomas Green was among them, his face bloodied but his eyes alert, watching Hawk's every move. You know what puzzles me? El Cuervo said as Hawk reached them. A man of your experience, your reputation. Surely you knew this would fail, so why try? Maybe I'm not as smart as people think, Hawk replied calmly. El Cuervo laughed. No, there's something else. He studied Hawk closely. You wanted to get caught, which means... His eyes narrowed. This is another trick. Check him, he ordered his men. 2 ravens roughly searched Hawk, finding nothing but his wounds and fever-hot skin. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught El Cuervo's attention, a flash of light from the ridge opposite his men. Then another, and another. Signals, he shouted. They're positioning men up there. Diego, take half the men and... The morning exploded into chaos, but not from the ridge. Young Chen had done his job well with the mirrors, creating phantom signals while the real action came from below. Cooper and his chosen men moving through the old tunnels had placed the black powder charges exactly as planned. not to collapse the mine, but to create a wall of smoke and confusion. As the charges went off, ram's horns sounded from multiple directions, Martinez's men creating the illusion of a larger force. The Ravens on the ridge turned to face the Phantom Army, their attention divided. But Hawk wasn't watching any of this. The moment the first charge detonated, he dropped and rolled, coming up with a derringer that had been hidden in his boot, the one place the Ravens hadn't checked. His first shot took Diego Cortez in the chest before the man could raise his silver-handled revolver. El Cuervo, however, was faster. His gun seemed to materialize in his hand as he fired at Hawk, but Hawk had already moved, diving toward Sarah Reed as the hostages scattered in the confusion. His second and last derringer shot went wide as pain from his wounded arm threw off his aim. "Clever!" El Cuervo shouted over the chaos, "but not clever enough." He raised his gun to fire at the fleeing hostages. What happened next would be debated in saloons across the territory for years to come. Some said Hawk moved faster than humanly possible. Others claimed El Cuervo's gun misfired. But the truth was simpler. In his determination to prove himself smarter than everyone else, El Cuervo had forgotten the most basic rule of gunfighting: never take your eyes off a wounded enemy. Hawk's tackle caught El Cuervo at the waist, sending them both rolling towards the mine shaft. El Cuervo's gun went flying as they grappled in the dust. Despite his wound and fever, Hawk matched the gang leader blow for blow. "Why?" El Cuervo gasped as they fought. "Why risk everything for these people?" Hawk's response was a headbutt that sent El Cuervo staggering back. "Because someone has to." The gang leader pulled a knife, slashing wildly. "I'll kill you slowly for this," he snarled. "Make you watch as I destroy everything you—" His words cut off in a gurgle as Hawk caught his knife hand and drove it back into El Cuervo's own chest. The gang leader's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell. Around them, the battle was ending as quickly as it had begun. The Ravens, their leader fallen and their hostages escaped, began surrendering to the armed townspeople emerging from the smoke. Thomas Green had found his wife and daughter. Sarah Reed was being tended to by Doc Harris. Hawk knelt beside the dying El Cuervo. "You were right about one thing," he said quietly. "I'm not as clever as people think. Sometimes the simplest plan is the best. Just keep getting up until the bad men stay down." As the sun rose over Rattler's End, it illuminated a changed town. The Ravens were rounded up, the hostages reunited with their families. Samuel Reed had survived his wounds and was already talking about rebuilding the saloon. The mine would reopen, this time owned and operated by the townspeople themselves. Hawk declined their offers to stay to help rebuild. By midnight, his horse was saddled and his wounds freshly bandaged by Doc Harris. "Do you ever settle down?" Sarah Reed asked as she brought him supplies for his journey. "Find a place to call home?" Hawk adjusted his hat, looking out at the desert. "This is home," he said simply, "wherever people need help." As he rode out under the stars, young Chen watched him go and asked his father, "Will we see him again?" Wei Chen smiled. "Perhaps, when another town needs a shadow to show them their own strength." And so another legend was born in the territory, not just of the shadow who brought justice, but of the ordinary people who found their courage in the darkest hour before dawn. As for Hawk, he rode on, following the whispers of other towns in need, other wrongs to right. For some men, peace isn't found in settling down but in standing up. Behind him, the lights of Rattler's End twinkled like stars fallen to earth, each one representing a family sleeping safely for the first time in years. And for Hawk, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.